With the launch of Episode Revenant, hunters got a brand new exotic helmet, Mask of Fealty. This exotic takes a melee that's just okay and turns it into a catalyst for your build, allowing you to deal a ton of shatter damage, consistently proc invisibility, and even offers you ways to deal some massive boss DPS. Let's get into it. The new Mask of Fealty states that Withering Blade hits and bounces create a small stasis crystal and refunds a portion of your melee energy, and that using Withering Blade to shatter crystals or frozen enemies will create more Withering Blades. In action, this means that your melee will bounce from target to target up to 3 times, creating crystals and refunding 7.5% energy per bounce, maxing out at roughly 22% melee energy. And using your shuriken to shatter frozen targets or crystals will send out 3 more shurikens to deal even more damage and slowing. The amazing part about this is its ability to instantly wipe out a group of enemies. The pure amount of shatter damage you cause by throwing 1 melee is already enough, but if you manage to hit a crystal or a frozen enemy, it becomes even stronger. And that's why we bring things like Winter Shroud and the Duskfield Grenade, and even some of the artifact mods to cause a ton of slowing, allowing you to feed back into your abilities and then deal a ton of shatter damage. So let's dive into the build and break down how it works. And first up, you have 2 options for your super. My favorite option is to run Golden Gun. That way you can still put out a ton of boss DPS or wipe out champions. And since this is an exotic helmet, you can hot swap to Celestial Nighthawk for DPS phases. The other option is to run Tether. This is more recommended when your team doesn't have a way to weaken the boss, or if there's a ton of enemies to wipe out like an Onslaught. But personally, I like Golden Gun a bit better. And since this build is all about using your melee, I'm bringing Gambler's Dodge as our class ability. That way we can dodge near enemies to get back another charge for our melee. And speaking of the melee, we're taking, of course, Withering Blade. This gives us 2 charges for our melee that will not only refund itself, but also deal a ton of AoE damage from bounces and crystals. And for that grenade, I'm taking the Duskfield Grenade. That way we can have more ways to slow, freeze, and shatter, which will play into our build as a whole. Alternatively, you can swap this out for the Swarm Grenade for burst damage or Grapple for movement. But Duskfield feels like the best synergy to me, and that's because of our first aspect, Winter Shroud. Now dodging will create a slowing burst. This not only makes it easier to freeze targets, but also incentivizes you to dodge near enemies, which you want to do to get back another melee charge because of Gambler's Dodge. And the other part of this aspect is that slowing enemies will now give you 300% increased class ability regeneration for 3 seconds. Between dodging near enemies, the Duskfield Grenade, and Withering Blade, you'll consistently be slowing enemies, meaning you get back your class ability even faster, which in turn means you get back your melee even faster. And the second aspect I went for was Stasis Executioner. Now killing enemies affected by any elemental debuff will make you invisible. While I initially wanted to bring Gunpowder Gamble, I reverted back to Stasis Executioner for its safety. This is absolutely needed for any hard content, since you will consistently go invisible with how much slowing and freezing you'll cause. And as for the fragments, the first fragment we're taking is Facet of Purpose. Now when we pick up an orb, we gain an elemental buff based on what super you have equipped. Since we're bringing Golden Gun, this means 5 seconds of restoration. But if you opt for Tether, this means a 22.5 hit point Void Overshield with 70% damage reduction. And next, I'm taking Facet of Protection, so that while we're surrounded, you gain an increased 15% damage resistance, which is generically good for overall survivability, especially since we want to be dodging near enemies. And since we cause so much shatter damage, we're of course bringing Facet of Ruin. Now the shatter damage that we cause will have increased range and damage. And if you're running Icebreaker, this will also boost the range on the ignitions you'll be causing. After that, I like to bring Facet of Command, so that killing a frozen enemy will create a Stasis Shard, which will give us more melee energy and play into our later artifact mods. And finally, I take Facet of Balance, so that rapid light-based kills will give 10% melee energy, and rapid darkness-based kills will give 10% grenade energy. If you are bringing Golden Gun, then you could swap this one out for Facet of Courage, so that you can deal an extra 10% more damage. Though since it'll be your only light-based ability, I'd still recommend Facet of Balance for that ability energy. Hey you! Yeah, you. Are you enjoying the video? If so, remember to leave a like on the video and consider hitting that subscribe button. So what does this look like in action? Well, you want to throw your melee into a group of enemies. That way you can ensure the most amount of bounces. But this also means you can easily wipe them out, since these bounces will create a stasis crystal and will freeze the enemies. You can now either shoot them or throw another melee to create a ton of shurikens. Obviously, you want to use your melee often, but this also goes for your class ability. We have so many ways to slow enemies that you'll consistently be gaining back your class ability at a rapid rate, which can be used to get another melee charge. And since we cause so much shatter damage from shattering crystals and frozen enemies, you'll be constantly making stasis shards from Faceta Command to feed back even more melee energy. And if you're lucky enough to have it, Icebreaker is so much fun with this build. The constant freezing of enemies means that you can whip out Icebreaker and cause an ignition. Oh yeah, and since you'll be consistently throwing those shurikens, you'll basically have infinite ammo with Icebreaker. So let's talk about ways to improve the build. First up, for the stats, I like to aim for 100 resilience and 100 strength to gain the most survivability and melee energy. Then I go for a split of discipline and intellect, since both are pretty helpful. As for the armor mods, for our helmet, first up, I'm taking a siphon mod that matches our primary weapon to help create a ton of orbs and consistently gain restoration. And if you are bringing Icebreaker, then I also like to bring a solar siphon mod, though this could be swapped out for hands-on to generate more super energy on melee kills. Then I bring heavy ammo finder to help generate even more heavy ammo for DPS phases. And for the gauntlet mods, I am taking heavy handed so that powered melee kills will create an orb, though this does have a 10-second cooldown. And then I also bring momentum transfer and impact induction so that grenade damage will now give back some melee energy and melee damage will now give back some grenade energy. This helps create a cycle to be able to use one ability and have it feed back into the other. As for the chest mods, just like for most builds, I'm running 3 resistance mods. I usually go for 2 elemental resistance and a concussive dampener. If you want a build to be viable in any endgame activity, then you need 3 resistance mods to take the least amount of damage as possible. Just make sure to match these to the activity that you're running. And as for the leg mods, once Bungie fixes the RNG and we can all get our hands on that God Roll Chill inhibitor, I'd highly recommend a Stasis primary and that Stasis heavy. So in that case, I'd run 3 Stasis weapon surges. Until I get a good Stasis heavy weapon, I'm likely gonna run a solar special and heavy weapon. So in that case, I'd take 2 solar weapon surges and a Stasis surge to deal more damage with both my DPS and my primary weapons. And as for the class mods, first I'm bringing Bomber for the extra grenade energy. Now our dodge will recharge at a faster rate, give us 100% melee energy, and with this mod, give us an extra 12% grenade energy. And then I like to pair that with Reaper, so that whenever we are using our class ability, our next weapon kill will create an orb to feed that weapon surge and our super, which pairs perfectly with powerful attraction, so that now we collect any nearby orbs by using our class ability, which will be very often. And since this episode has a ton of stasis perks for its artifact, we will be getting a pretty big buff to this build for this episode. The first artifact perk we want to look at is Hail the Storm, making it so that shattering a crystal will send out ice shards, slowing nearby targets and dealing some damage. The bigger reason we want to take this is that so we can boost it with a tonic, making it so that all of our shatter damage will deal an additional 12% damage. Brain Freeze is another great perk, which will create a slowing stasis field around frozen enemies, which is huge when paired with your stasis shuriken. And it's also a good idea to bring Crystalline Converter, so that collecting stasis shards will make it so that your next stasis melee will create even more stasis crystals, allowing you to deal even more shatter damage. And if you're running a stasis primary, then I also like to bring one with Frost and Wind Chill to gain frost armor and more reload speed. And if you are bringing that grenade launcher in your heavy slot, then I also like to bring my grenade launcher perks like Rapid Impacts, so that we gain increased reload speed for our grenade launchers by dealing damage with them, which also means you can bring Concussive Reload, since it'll give you an easy way to weaken the boss and deal an extra 15% more damage just by using your grenade launcher. So let's take a look at the weapons I like to run with this build. First up, in the kinetic slot, I like to bring a primary weapon, mainly a stasis weapon, since we can get some good artifact synergy from them. I love pulse rifles, so the world drop Psy Hermetic is one of my favorites. It can roll with Headstone for even more stasis synergy and AoE damage. And in that energy slot, I really love to bring two different weapons. Icebreaker is a solid option, which can cause a ton of ignitions, making it deal decent damage for both DPS and ad clearing. And another great option is Still Hunt. Since I like to do the Celestial Nighthawk hot swap, this means you can fully take advantage of some massive boss DPS. Personally, Icebreaker feels a bit better with all the synergy, but with only 13% of the player base having it, I felt like it was good to give a good backup option. A Baron Action is a good option if you don't want to use the exotic in this slot, since it can roll with Heal Clip and Incandescent, offering you more survivability from healing and invisibility. For the heavy weapon, Chill Inhibitor is the best option with Envious Arsenal and Bait and Switch, though less than 1% of all rolls have that combo. So until the RNG update comes out on November 5th, I'd suggest running a Solar Heavy to match your special weapon. Apex Predator is a good rocket that will pair nicely with both Icebreaker and Still Hunt. But I also really like the Marsilian C, which is a world drop grenade launcher that can roll with Envious Arsenal and Explosive Light for some good burst DPS. Between the massive amounts of shatter damage you cause with all of your abilities and the impeccable boss DPS with Celestial Golden Gun, this build feels strong in almost any scenario. But remember, mastering this build is only the beginning. Experiment with different combinations and tweak your loadouts to suit your playstyle. If you found this video helpful or just enjoyed seeing a new perspective, feel free to like the video and comment down below what you might change or how you'd improve the Mask of Fealty build. Keep an eye out for future videos as we continue to explore the ever-evolving world of Destiny 2. Until then, may the threads of fate be ever in your favor. This is Lucky Mech signing off. See you on the next adventure, Guardians.